Hey guys, welcome to this episode 2 of creating a Nuxt3 to-do app with test-driven development concepts. In the last episode, we ended off with a sort of UI that we started creating. This was a while ago, so I actually committed the code fully. So I had to go and sort of pick out the code again and decided that I'm going to start at this base where the screen is basically just the question, what are we doing today? And also I had a commit from another user on GitHub that fixed an issue. So you'll see if we run yarn test, we get some failing tests because of an issue with IDs. So you can see that some of the tests fail now because there's dates and IDs that aren't correct. And that's because in the store, we started using the ID as UUID instead of just the number, because at a certain point we used the index of the array to give IDs to the to-dos. So we have to refactor this a bit to make the tests pass. And that's also the cool thing about tests. So now we know the tests are failing and something's wrong with our code. So let's just fix this a little bit. So first thing we need to do is change from ID from number to string, because we're using the string package now. And by the way, we could also just use crypto.randomuid, which is available. But since we started with UUID, we'll just keep using that. We get a string date, and then we have to go to where we actually check the item. So ID over here would be a string, just to make it clear that that's what we're looking for. And when we insert the to-do with to-do add, we give it the ID, and that ID is added there. And then now you can see that the item to do. So this gives us an error. This will always return false since the type string and number have no overlap. And that's because we need to make this string. This will be a string. And that should take care of that. And then what we can do is back in the tests, when we look at the tests themselves. So the first one that failed was the adds a to-do. So you can see that it's giving us a created at of we're looking for any date, but when we create this to-do, we're giving it a new date and a new date, and then we're pushing that up there. And the ID is 0 over here. So what we really need to do is say that this needs to be expect.any string, because the ID is now a string and not a number. So we can't just say 0. And over here you can see that we're using ID as 0 to get the first item in the store, but that's not really what we want to do. So what we actually want to do over here is first of all, when we create this to-do, it'll be the first to-do in the store. So it used to be the 0 index, but now we need to actually know what this ID is. So I think what we can do is create a new function that says something like get first ID or something like that. Get first to-do item, or get first to-do ID. And we can just make this a function. And what this will do is it should probably take the store, and we can say that the type of this would be return type of use to do store, right? Oh, we have to do type of. And so what we can do is just say return the store dot items at 0 dot id. So that will help us get the first to do ID. And then what we can do is over here we can just say that the ID is get first to do ID, and then we just pass the store in. And that should fix that. And let's do that everywhere. So I guess that'll still work. Over this, we have to do get first to do ID, pass it the store, and do the same over here. Same over here. So let's see how many tests this fixes. Alright, so it looks like all the tests passed now. So the main issue was that we switched from using indexes to using the UID. And I'll just give a shout out to the user that did commit this. His name is so this is the user MOH1434. So thanks for that commit. That really helped out a lot. Okay, so now that we're back at baseline sort of, with knowing that our tests pass for the to-do store, what we actually want to do is just try and run this and see like where we are at. So we can just do yarn dev, I think, and then open this up. So this is basically what we're seeing. There's nothing really going on. Console's empty. The app is pretty empty. So what we need to do is, I know in the last episode we ended by creating that input, and then I actually went on and finished the code for that, but I didn't commit it regularly enough. So in the end, all the code was already there when I did my first commit, so I couldn't go back and sort of start from that point. So I basically just deleted all that so I can create the components from scratch. So the way we're going to do that is going to app.view, and this is the section that will sort of contain all the to-do stuff. And the idea here is that I want to create two components basically, and the first component will be a to-do input, and we'll create these components just now, and a to-do list. So that's basically going to be the sort of area where we add the to-dos, and this is going to be the display of the to-dos. And this will take like an items prop, and this would take like a v model and a save method and error state. And the way we do that is we can just save this. It will error for now. Let's just stop the server. So we'll start that up again when we have a version that we think works. But what we can do is just create a to-do input .view, and we can create a to-do list, I believe, .view. Yeah, so to-do list and to-do input. And I think let's start with the to-do input. So the to-do input is basically, it needs to expose some props, because what we want to do in the end is on the to-do input we want to say v model, and we can say something like new to-do, and we can say like at I don't know, like at create or at submit or something like that. Let's just see what, yeah, so I think we'll create a custom init here and just say save equals save new to-do. And we also want to give it like an error state. So we have to define these. But first of all, I want to set up my linter so that it actually works out. I believe I need to add volar. And I'm just going to activate this in the workspace. And then the old view2 extension I'm going to disable in this workspace. I'll just reload this. And then another thing you can do, but I'm not going to do that, to activate takeover mode, is say add built-in type script in JavaScript, and then you just disable it in this workspace. But because I'm going to use custom TypeScript files and stuff, I would rather just keep that as is. But now you can see that we get some errors over here. So we need to define these variables. So what we can do is just say const new to do equals a ref of this, and we can also say const save new to do is equal to a function, and what this is going to do, so now we need our store, so we can say const use to do store equals, I mean this isn't okay, so import use to do store from store.todo, and I prefer this syntax. And then basically what we want to do is we need to do some checking over here, like if the value is sort of empty, or do some validation. But we also need to create the error variable equals a ref of false. And so basically this error is going to model this value, and or not model it, but it's going to read this value, and the v model is going to model this, and save new to do is going to call that. And what we basically want to do is we can just do like if new to do dot value dot length perhaps is less than 1. We can do is less than or equal to 0. Then we'll just say that the error dot value equals true. So if you reference your variables in the setup, you'll have to look at the dot value property on there, and then we just return. And basically the errors aren't going to display like a message. All I want to do is use this error prop to sort of render like a red circle. So I think I'll show you the final final product. This is the final product with actual to-dos and stuff added. So as soon as I try to add an empty to-do, you'll just see like this red little circle. So it's not a lot of validation, but it does work. And you'll see that this version actually already has log out and log in and register. So that's what we'll be working on. Just close that down. Okay, so this is saying element is missing the end tag. Yes, because we need to close that off. Nope, not that one. This one. And we can do the same over here. There's no slots, so you don't have to worry about that. Then in the to-do input, we have to, we can actually just first do this. So we can say that the const to-do store equals use to do store. And now over here we can say, so there's no error because it's not empty, and that's literally the only thing that we're checking is to do store dot add, because we have that action. And now we get the to do add type that we've added. So if we forget what that is, we can just go to do, and we can see, okay, to do add only expects an object with a label of string. So now we know that we can just do label, and the label would be the new to do dot value, since that's being modeled by the input. And then just to reset the input, we can just do new to do dot value equals empty. All right, so now we basically have a way to add to-dos, but we have an empty input file. So what we need to do in the input, we know that it exposes a few things, like it needs to have a save event, it needs to have error prop, and it also needs to v model something. So how do we set up like a v model? How do we know like what needs to emit from that? So first what I'll do is I'll create this Nuxt shortcut thing that I've created, and then let's just do like a div for now. Just say like to do input. This will change to the Tailwind classes, but for now I just want something in there. And then I'm going to show you how to define some emits and props, especially when using TypeScript. So a way you'll do that without TypeScript is you'll say define props, and then in your props you'll say like error type is boolean and the required equals true. So that's like the non-TypeScript way of doing it, but this won't give you the type inference in your template that you'd expect. So the way to do it in TypeScript is it's quite the same. So you'll just say const props equals define props, but instead of calling a function with an object, we do this little generic type reference thing and then call the function. But in here, this is where we define our TypeScript types. And the way we define the data for the v model, so this needs to read the v model data, and the way that's being done is through this. So new to do is being passed to v model, and then this component is reading it. And the way we have to give it a value is by saying model value, and then that will be a string. So we also have the error, which is a boolean. So now you can see this is much alike the way we define it in a function with actual JavaScript values, but this is like a smart way of the library sort of inferring what the props will be, because this is just TypeScript types. This isn't actually values, but it will actually work. So if you want to use model value, you can just do like model value over there, and it knows that that's going to be passed as a prop, as a string. And if you want to make it optional, you can just do a question mark. So then you have to check if it's undefined and stuff. But that's the way you define a v model value, and this is a normal prop. Oops. So now also there's a method that's being emitted from this input back to the app container. And so at this point we're saying at save. So we need to define a method or an emit and emit that basically says fire the save event when something happens. And we also need to fire an event when something changes inside and we want to emit it as a v model. So the way we do that is the same sort of way as with props, but we say const emits, or we can just do emit is define emits. And again, these are functions that are defined on the global space in Nuxt3. So you don't need to import define props or define emits from anywhere. It sort of just is available to you. And we do the same type of thing over here, where we define the function signatures in a TypeScript type of way, and it will know that that's what's being expected to emit. So a function signature would look something like there's an event, and the event's name is the update of model value, and we also want to pass a value of string, and what this returns is void. So we don't return anything, it just emits this value. And then for this, we also have a save event, and this save event doesn't pass any value, it just sort of lets the parent component know that we are saving something. And that's the way you define this function signature. So it knows now to listen for the update of the model value and pass a string along, and it also knows that a save method is needed. So that basically will do the trick. So all we really have to do is add like an input over here, and we can say I believe we can say v model or we can say at input instead of actually a much cleaner way to do this. I'm reading the old code, but I kind of want to do this a bit different. Is I want to create a computed property, so I can also show you like how that will work. So what you can do is say local state, which is only relevant to this component, will be a computed function. And the way that will work is it has a getter, and this is what should be returned when we try to get, and it has a setter. What should we do with the value when it tries to set? So when we get, what we want to do is return props.model value just props.model value, and we also, when we set it, we want to do emit and then update model value. So you can see we even get nice little TypeScript help over there. It knows that we want to emit one of these two because we've defined the types. So update model value, and then we need to give it a string, which will be this value. So that's pretty simple. So now basically, this needs to be, so now basically we need to model this by this input. So we can do vModel equals local state. So now it's gonna, when you type into the input, it's gonna try and set a value, and what it's reading from is the model value. So once you type into it, this immediately emits that value back up to the model value, which is being stored in this new to do. And then that new to do is also on the vModel. So when it reads basically this model value that's being set back. So it's like a two-way binded sort of input. And then you also get a button that just says save, and then we can just do add click equals save, I believe. Oh no, we have to emit, sorry. At click we can do $, just like in the old way, $, emit, and this will tell you that these events are available, and you can do save. I also think we might want to do a key press lesson on this, so we don't have to press the click on the button. We can just do key press.enter equals $ emit save. So either when we press enter or when we click, then we're saving. So what I want to do in the app, just to show this, is let's just console.log to-do store.items. Let's see what happens. We need to start the server, and basically I need to comment out this to-do list for now because there's nothing in there. Okay, so let's start the server. Alright, so this is a really ugly sort of custom Tailwind thing, but when let's just attach this so it doesn't disappear. So when we type something in here, let's say hello, this is modeling back to the app, and the app is sending that back to the input, so it's reading and writing. And then when I press enter, it's giving me a proxy to the store, and there you can see our new to do: created at, done is false, ID is that, label is hello. If we add another one, test, if we click, now you can see we have 2 items in the array, and so forth and so on. So now we have 3 items, and if we refresh, then it's basically gone. So first, what we want to do now is just let's style this a little bit, and the way I'll do that is just to sort of hook this up over here, and we can just do like that. So let's style the input. So the input also has this error state that it's looking at to know that if something is up but that's not right, then we have to set an error. But first, we have to do something in this error. Like if it's an error state, like if this is empty, the error would be true, but we need to sort of design this to show the red, but also we kind of want it to go away. So what we can do is we can add a watcher to the error state, and that's pretty easy in view 3. You can just do watch, and then the object you want to watch, and we know the value is going to be a boolean, and then what we want to check is if the value is true. So we can just do if value. We can say set timeout, and what we want to do is say error.value equals false. So basically all this does is it just resets the error state after, let's say, 3 seconds, just so that it isn't there forever, you know. So now when we set this error.value, this will trigger the watcher. The watcher will see that it's true. It will set a timeout. In 3 seconds, it will make it false. So, and this to do input will be aware of that because it's reading that error value as well. So let's start with some sort of styles. We can do a BG gray. I'm just going to copy these from what I've already written. And padding top 18, I just experimented with this. And then the min height would be, oh, sorry, this is the wrong component I'm checking here. All right, so scratch all that, we have to start over. So the classes I want to add is a width of 10 out of 12. And when it's small, I want to make it width 8 out of 12. And when it's the max width would be large, and max width large is an actual value. Let me see if I can get that. Max width large, you can see that it's 512 pixel. And also we want to center it up, and we also want to give it a height of 24, which will be 96 pixels, and we can give it a background of white so that it discerns a little bit from the app background. We give it a rounded prop of MD. We can give it a shadow small. We can give it a padding of 5 overall. We can give it a padding X of 10. So PY5, I should probably do this, PY5 and PX10. And then I want to give it a flex. I'm going to say item center. And I'm going to say justify between. And also margin bottom of 5. So that's a lot of Tailwind classes, and I know some people really do not enjoy this type of way of styling things. So there's our little container, but to me it's just, I don't know, it's a quicker way, especially when you have all the syntax to help you out, like the highlighting and stuff. But if you don't like it, I understand that too. Just don't hate me for liking it. So then what we want to do over here is just give it a placeholder to say create a to-do. Let's just close this down so we can see a little more. And I probably have to zoom this in a little bit. Sorry if that was too small. Okay, so we've added a create to-do thing. And now to use that error state, what we'll do is we'll add a conditional class, or like a binded class sort of, and in there we can give it an object, and then we'll say if the border, we want to give it a border of red 300 when the error is true, and if the error is not true, we just want to give it a border gray of 300, which is the opposite of error. Alright, so now we have the border red and border gray based on the error classes, and what that should do already is if we do a save, it should read that error value, but it doesn't seem like it is, so we have to figure out why. First of all, let's just finish the styles on this. I'm gonna start copying and pasting these classes, because I want to get to the crux of the video, which is creating a database and storing user information and everything. So now you can see that we have added these borders and some widths on everything, added some padding, and then once it's focused, we give it a blue outline, and if it's not focused, we do that. And then if we save, you'll see we have the red error state, and it should reset after 3 seconds. So that's when it errors, it's empty, so we give it like a red border. And then for the button, we can also just add some basic classes. I'm also going to copy paste this, and what I'll do is just add these classes over here and save. So now you'll see we have a nicely formatted button. On hover, we have like this green transition, and the easy way to do that in Tailwind is you add a hover directive and then give it what you want it to be on hover, and then transition all on duration. So if we click that, then you'll see that it does the red to do. So that's basically the styling of this input. I think for the next part, what I'm going to do is just quickly add the to-do list and also create those components, and then I'll run through the code and explain what everything does, so that we can get to actually creating some route protection and doing some user authentication. Alright, so I've created a few components: a list item container, a to-do item, and the to-do list. And the thing that we're going to add in the main app.view is just the to-do list. And you can see that with autocomplete, you actually get your components in a list. So I'll add a to-do list. And another cool thing about Nuxt3 is now it gives me an error because it says all this stuff, but basically it says that the type is missing items. So we know that it requires an items prop. And what we can do over here is just say items equals the to-do store dot items and save that. And this should already be showing some stuff. And then you can see it actually has all these things. But if I do test2, you can see that it adds underneath. But what I really want to do is show them in a reversed order. So what we can do is just say to do items. So we can do, we've created a getter, if you remember from the previous episode, that says get sorted to-dos, that sorts them by date. And what we can do is just change these two up, like say that the B has to be minus the A. But what I'll do instead is I'll go to the app.view, and then I'll just say get sorted to-dos, and then I'll reverse this. Because the thing is, these sorted to-dos do not, so if I do reverse, that will usually mutate the original array, but because in the to-do we are doing this like copy, it won't change the state of our actual items. So that's fine. And then now we can look a little bit at what the components are doing. But first let's do test, and then test2 should be above test, and that's correct. So we've created those to-dos. So now let's start with the to-do list component. So in the to-do list, you'll see that it obviously defines props with an items, which has the type of to-dos. And if we go to the to-dos, you'll see we define this in our store, which is either a to-do array or an undefined array, because it's empty. It could be empty. And back in the to-do list, you'll see that we're checking if the items.length is more than 0, then we should display that. Otherwise, it should not display anything. And then we loop through the items and then give it a key, and then the to-do item component takes a to-do prop. So if we remove this, you'll see that it also will tell us like we're looking for an item prop, which you don't give me, so please pass me that. And now we can look at the to-do item, which is where a lot of the the work is being done. So we've installed a package called hero icons, and then we can use that to display some icons. And then there's also a use to do store. Obviously we want to use the store here as well. And then to do is the type of the to do. And then define props, we're expecting a to do. And we instantiating the to do store. And then we're creating a local function that basically just says to do store.remove the ID that we will pass into that function. And we also do update to do done, which takes an entire to do. We check the current state, and basically we just switch that state. So if it's currently done, let's have a look at this. So if it's currently done, it will be crossed out. So we check that, and then this is also green. But if we undo it, then it goes back to gray. So that's all being done by checking the current state. And what I'm doing over here is just like a helper to show like a pretty formatted date. So I'm just using the Intel datetime format class and formatting the current created at of the to-do. And so the to-do item is wrapped in a list item container. And basically all that is just a little helper sort of template thing. It doesn't have any state or anything, so nothing is being exported. All it really does is just wraps this this item in there so that we can reuse these styles over and over. And then at the to-do item, it's being wrapped in that. So inside of that, we're giving it some classes of what we want to do. So this overflow hidden and white space no wrap basically does the next thing. So if I do like a really long to do and save that, you'll see that it just cuts off. It doesn't sort of fold over and create like a huge to do thing, which I guess can be annoying if you have really long to dos, but I just wanted everything to fit in the same little space. And then the line through is basically a class that's added if the to do is done, and that's what's adding this little line. And then just giving it some text formatting. So we can actually also remove the uppercase, because I'm not sure if I like that. It looks a little bit more better if it's just lowercase. And the title is obviously the to do done. So this title is a built-in HTML attribute. So if I hover this, you'll see that it also gives us a little title of what this is. So that will help with when you have really long to-dos and you hover this, then it shows you the actual full to-do text and not the cut off one. And then basically we're just showing the label inside as well, and we're showing that little past date over there. And then because this is flex now, our icons are on the right side. So we're adding the check circle icon and giving it a width, a height, and a transition for the hover. So when we hover this, it lights up a little bit, both of them, because the color changes from text green 400 to text gray. So if it's to do.done, then it'll be green. If it's not done, it'll be gray. But also if we hover it, then it'll also be green. And then when we click on that, it just does update to do done, which we call this to do store. So we need to pass that to do. And then the X circle icon, we pass it the ID, and it also has that little text red and hover text red transition. And that's basically it for the to do item. So that's almost all the, the styling and everything. But the problem now is when we add test2 and we save and we refresh this page, obviously all our to-dos are gone. And what you can do is just store them in the browser's local storage. Then you don't have to worry about like user authentication and stuff. But if we add a database now and we don't separate it by sort of the owner of the to-do or something, then everyone that logs into your page or that opens up the page will see the same to-dos, because we're just fetching global to-dos from the database. So we need sort of a user to show those to-dos. And what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to add the styling for the markup and the styling for the user login stuff, and then I'll explain what that does, and then we can actually get started with adding a database. And we'll be using Prisma and PlanetScale, which is an awesome sort of a combination of you can use Postgres or Mongo or MySQL, but I'm going to use MySQL with PlanetScale. Alright, so I did a few things. Number one, I deleted the app.view file because this is no longer just a single page app. It also has auth page now. And with Nuxt, like it always has been, if you create a pages folder and give it names like this, then it will automatically create the routes based on that. So if I go to / then it goes to the app, and if I go to /auth, it'll show this new auth page. And basically this auth page does the same type of thing that the to-do page does. It defines some refs that is set up, so email, password confirm, loading, and error. And we also have a thing called login mode, and that's what controls this, or register instead or login instead. So now what we're doing is we have a form, or well, the main area, and then we're looking at the login mode to see what we should display on top, create an account or login. And also we're looking at that same thing to show the link at the bottom here. And then basically we just have a form, and we're preventing the submission. Otherwise, if we click enter, it will do the normal submit and reload the page. So we have to prevent that natural or default behavior. We have an email input that models the email. We have a password input that models the password. We have password confirm that's only showed if we are in register mode. And then we have the authorize button, and when we click that, we go to authorize, and for now we're just logging console.logging. But it also has this sort of dynamic disabled prop, which we can access in the CSS as well by saying disabled. And then once we click it, then if something is actually loading, this will go gray, because once we click it, I can actually show you that. We can just say the loading.value equals true. So if we click this now, then it should go, might have to refresh this. It should go gray because now the state is loading. So that's basically what that's going to do. And this is what we'll do when the request is actually being sent to the backend to create the user in the database, or to get a token when trying to log in. So that's basically how the register will work. And what we kind of want to do is we don't want to allow a user to go to this route if they're not signed in, because if they're not signed in, they shouldn't be able to see this page. So that's what we'll set up next. Setting up a middleware in Nuxt3 is pretty simple, and this is client-side middleware. The server middleware we'll do when we start setting up server routes and everything. But for now, let's just do a client middleware. So we can do auth.global.ts, and you have to add the global for it to register sort of as a global middleware. And then the way you define a middleware is you just export a default function that's called define Nuxt route middleware. And this takes an async function that has a to and a from, but we only really care about the to. And what this to is basically a route path. So it's the path to which you are trying to navigate. And we want to check that first, what is allowed. So we'll do something like allowed, and then we'll give some regexes to test this. And basically the only route that is allowed to be routed to is the auth route. And we have to escape these things. And the last slash is can be appended or not, so we have to make that optional. And it needs to be fully qualifiable. So this entire regex has to start with that value and end with that value. And then now what we can do is first check that if allowed dot sum. So if any of these basically match, so we have a route, and then what we can say is we have to test this route with a regex, and then we say to.full path. This is the only route that is allowed to be navigated to without any authentication. So then we'll just return void basically. So if we try to go to /auth, it will always allow us because we don't need a user to go to this page. But if that's not the case, we want to read a cookie. And this cookie will start setting when we do the login. But Nuxt3 has a very cool way of checking cookies, and it's basically just a composable called useCookie, and then you give it the cookie name. So the cookie name that I'll use is Nuxt3 TDD token v2, because I have a v1 already, so I'm just going to keep this consistent. And then if there's no cookie, or the cookie doesn't have a value, then what we'll do is we'll say return navigate to, then give it the auth route. So that's basically just checking if there's no cookie, then don't go to this page because this user is obviously not logged in. We can do more than that. Basically, we can import the store and set the user if there's a cookie and stuff like that. But the cookie is going to be set from the server using a just using a set cookie header. So we know that by the time when someone reaches the app on an illegal sort of route, that the cookie should be there if they logged in. So if it's not, we should just go back to this login page. So now if I try to go to the / page, you'll see it immediately redirects me to auth. And the thing is, you can bypass this pretty easily. So it's not a very safe way of doing everything, but let's look at adding a cookie over here. So we can just add anything basically with Nuxt3 TDD token v2, and then give it a value of anything basically. So if I try to go to /now, it will allow me because it's actually finding that cookie. But we're going to have to use this cookie on the server side to identify the user. So even if someone does that, if they enter like an invalid cookie or something and they try to navigate to the index, we won't find the user and we'll redirect back to the auth page from the server side. So this is an okay way to do this for now. And that's basically protecting the app. Let me just clear these cookies actually, and then refresh. Oops. And now you see we can't go back to the base route because there's no cookie. So for the next part, I think let's talk about installing PlanetScale. Let's talk about getting Prisma set up and defining a schema for our users. So this is PlanetScale. It's an insanely cool database system. Like creating, the big problem with SQL stuff usually is like you start out with a certain schema, like you know that your users have to have this type of property and all that, so your database gets that schema, and then most of the time during development you will go and something needs to change. Like let's say we want to add a verified property to the user object, so we want to start sending emails to make sure that it's an actual email that exists. Then adding that verified prop is usually you need to create migrations and you have to migrate it to your database. But with PlanetScale, it works a lot like Git. So you basically create branches and then you sort of push to a test branch or something, and then you can test that on your local machine as much as you want. And then if you're happy with altering the table and everything, you can just merge it into master, and then that change would immediately be visible on the main branch. So I'm going to create a new PlanetScale account quickly. You can also do that with getting started. All right, so now I've created a PlanetScale account, verified my email and everything. Let's just go through all of this. So let's create a first database and we'll call it Nuxt3 TDD v2. And we'll keep that as the database name. So this is also the CLI command that you can use. And I'm going to open that in a new tab because we actually need the CLI. And then we'll create the database. And the database takes a while to initialize, so while you get ready to do that, we can look at the PlanetScale CLI, because you can connect to your database without any, by using the URL, the full URL with the password and everything. But with the CLI, you set up like a local proxy, and then you can just use a localhost URL. And by logging into the CLI, you have like a direct connection with your database. So to install the CLI, you can go to this page, planetscale.com/features/CLI, download the latest, and then you can see they give you like a few commands on how to deploy stuff. But we'll do most of this manually in the dashboard, but you can have a look at more advanced things. So if we go to the code again, what we want to do now is we can just stop this server for a second, and then once you install the PlanetScale CLI, you have this command called pscale. So it gives you a lot of help on how to do everything, so you can connect and select and all those kinds of things. But the first thing you want to do is do pscale auth login. Now what we want to do, so we can even test this out immediately by doing pscale connect to Nuxt3 TDD v2, and the branch we want to connect to is main. So now you'll see we actually have a connection established to the main thing. And what this allows you to do is add a database URL to this URL. You can see that I have a database URL property that's MySQL root at this Nuxt3 TDDs, and we have to rename this to Nuxt3 TDD v2. And this is the database name and the host and the port. So once you've set this up, then it's pretty easy to set up Prisma. So let's do that next. So the first thing you want to do is just do yarn add development dependency of Prisma. And Prisma is like a sort of ORM type thing, but it makes writing database queries and stuff pretty easy, and migrating is also quite easy and everything. And also maintaining schemas is like a breeze, because you can just edit the same schema file instead of having to generate hundreds of migrations for your database. So once that's installed, I'm going to use npx and just say Prisma. I believe it's init. So your Prisma schema was created in this folder, Prisma schema.prisma. Prisma would have added database URL, but it already exists in env. Yes. Set the database URL in the env to your database, set the provider, and run Prisma DB pool if you have an existing database. And you can run generate to generate the client. So they generate like code for you based on your schema. Now, in terms of setting up this Prisma schema, there's a few things that you have to add from this. So I'm just going to delete that. The client generator, we need to give it another property called preview features for it to work with the PlanetScale stuff. So over here you can see that we want a preview feature of referential integrity, and then for the DB we have this env database URL which we saved in our .env, so it'll read that automatically. And then we also have the referential integrity, which will be equal to Prisma. I believe that's what we need there. And then now we can actually just create our models. So I'm going to create both the to-do model and the user model, just because users have a relation to to-dos, and we won't be using the to-dos probably in this video because it's going to get quite long, but we'll use the users model. So you can see that there's a formatting, cannot format Prisma files, and we'll use Prisma, and that's fine. So that's an extension I installed. You can see add syntax highlighting and all those things. Okay, so first let's create the to-do model, and basically this is just defining what a to-do should look like. And the to-do has an ID that we know is a string, and we also will make this a unique ID. So you can say something like auto, I think there's like an auto increment function or something, but that creates like 0, 1, 2, 3 type of IDs, and we want to create our own IDs. And it also has an owner ID, which will be a string. It also has a label, which is obviously also a string, and we can create a I believe there's something like add db .varchar. We don't want to have it be more than 255 because this is user input. They can insert huge texts and stuff. And then the done is obviously a boolean. Oops. And this will be a default, so we don't have to define this when it's not being set. And we can also do a created at, which is a date time. What we want to do here is just say it has a default of now. And then there's also a special one that's updated at, which is also date time, but it has like a at updated at thing. Yeah, I'm not sure if you should call this a function, probably. And then we also have a relation to a user, and this will be a user, and we can make this small, I think. Let's just keep it consistent, make it big. And this user is a relation field, and you give it the fields property, which basically says on this object what do we reference, and that will be the owner ID, and what does it reference on the external object, that would be the ID. So that's basically our entire to do, and you'll see that user is not defined, so we need to create a model for user. User also has an ID, which is a string at ID. User also has email, which is a string, and this has to be unique. User has a password, which is a string, and also user has to-dos, which is a to-do array. So because there's this relation, we can actually query the to-dos along with the user. We can also give it a created at. Maybe we want to do some statistics on this at some point. This will be the now function, and updated at would also be datetime, which would be at updated at. I'm not sure if this should be a function. I'm just going to try without a function. And that's basically our entire Prisma schema. So the way we send this to PlanetScale, basically, so if you go to this one, you'll see that this database has no production branches, and that's fine because we want to first create our schema before we make this a production branch. So this is basically still in sort of test mode. But the way we can do this now is we can say, I think it's npx prisma db push. So what this is going to do, it's going to generate a client for you, use the environment variable to define the URL. It's going to create the schema, and then it's going to push it to the remote thing. So we need the database to be running for this. So we can say pscale connect the Nuxt Nuxt3 to do v2. Oops, and we need to give it a branch. Maybe it'll choose, okay, it's selected main. And now we can do this. Okay, so error validating DB, the URL must start with a protocol, and that's because we haven't changed provider to MySQL. Now you can see that it's using this URL. It loaded the environment variables from env, the schema loaded from Prisma, and it's now basically pushing the schema. Your database is now in sync, and now you can see it's installing a new dependency called Prisma client. And this Prisma client is basically the thing that generates the code to query your database. And that's pretty cool. A lot of people don't like generated code, but to me, it just makes it so simple to define your schema, and then the generated code automatically knows with TypeScript inference, like what properties exist and what you need to give it to add it and all those types of things. And so now that generated the client, and we can actually look at the client as well. So you can see that it knows that we've created a owner ID label, created at. So it has a lot of things that it's doing here, but it knows exactly what we want to query and stuff. So that's pretty cool. Just keep in mind that every time you install a new dependency, your Prisma folder might get deleted, and then you need to run npx Prisma generate again, so that it gets generated back into your node modules. But this won't happen in production because you're not typically installing anything while in runtime. So, all right, so that basically defines our schema, and I think we can look at that. Let's go to the branches, and we have main, and let's look at the schema. Now you can see that this is what we sent as SQL by creating those default properties and stuff. So this is ID, not null, owner ID, and created at would be the current timestamp, and updated at will also update once you create something, but that's added on in Prisma itself. So it knows when you update the property, then it needs to automatically create the updated at. And it could be that I need to call this as a function. Let's see. Let's generate it first, and then we can do npx Prisma db push. So because our main branch is still in test, we can keep making changes without needing to create like pull requests, basically. There we go. I think basically, I think we can use either the function or not the function to create the updated at, but it's fine. We'll see what happens when we create it. So updated at datetime not null. So unique key, yeah. So the schema, everything looks good for now for us to get started with creating users. And this gets us into sort of the meat and potatoes of this this next few steps. And the way I like to do this is whenever I work with what I'd like to call entities. So I'll make like either an entities folder, but in this case, I'll just make a source folder. This is where all the main sort of controller logic lies to me. So I don't really care about how this is being queried, if it's coming from an HTTP request, or I'm basically creating a separate module that does user management using Prisma, and it does to-do management using Prisma, but it can be imported by anything, an HTTP module, it can be imported by just plainly into a server or something like that. So what I typically like to do is just do users.ts. So every every sort of entity has its own file, and then I also create a users.test.ts. And then I'll also have like a todo.ts and todo.test.ts. And if you have huge apps, you have a lot more entities. So you'll have like accounts and customers and invoices and all these different things. And if you separate them into files like this, they all become separate entities that you can manage on their own, and you don't have to sort of think about it from the reverse endpoint where you create your HTTP requests and then per HTTP request you query the database directly. You want sort of like an encapsulated piece of software so that it's easily testable, and also it doesn't give you like headaches to manage all the different places. You know, all your core sort of code is in the same place. One thing I do want to install is the Joy library for schema validations. So we want to validate things coming into our classes. We want to make sure that everything is nice and clean. And we actually need to add a few more packages that I forgot. So we need to do, as soon as this finishes, we need to add a JSON web token, and oops, come on, yarn add -d add types /JSON web token. I think this is the package name. Let me just make sure. In types, and we'll use JSON web token to sort of authenticate the user with a cookie. First, what I want to do is just set up like the testing environment, and what we have to do is include the /source and ****.test.ts. So that also gets included in our test runner. And we also need to go to this. I'll just do define and test and what else is there? I mean, it's describe, not define. And we can just from test, and then we describe users, and we can import users from /users, and all we want to do is test is a users instance. Basically all we're going to do is say expect the users object. Well, I guess this is very useless, but we can say const users equals new users, and we can say expect users dot to be instance of users. This is a useless test, but it's just to get something in this file so we can start testing. And now we know we need to export a class of users, and I think we basically just have to do that. Oh, we have to export. And then let's see what happens when we run yarn test. There we go. So users also starts parsing now, and we can start like writing useful code. So first of all, I'm gonna just define the functions and things in users. We can do a constructor and pass in like some objects, like maybe a logger or something like that. But I'm gonna not do that for this video because it's not really important. So users won't really accept anything. What we can do is we can pass the user model in here, which will be a client, I believe. Let's see. So this is where we'll start using the Prisma client. So we can do, let's first do this. we'll say declare user model, and then this dot user model equals user model. And I'm not sure what the type will be for now, so let me just leave that off. And then when we do new users, it expects a user model. So how do we get a user model? Well, we can just do import client from Prisma. Now we have to do @Prisma/client, and then you can say const client equals new client, and then what we want to pass in here is the client.user, I believe. So you see, because we did some installs, now the Prisma file is gone. So we have to do npx Prisma generate again. So every time you install some new dependencies, then the Prisma client will go away. So this will be Prisma client. And we still don't seem to be getting, see the .prisma. What did I run here? Ah, okay, so Prisma has been generated now. All right, so now we have the Prisma client and client.user. Let's see what the type is. The type is Prisma client with all those weird things, but I don't think we need to explicitly set this type, because yeah, maybe we should. So let's figure out how to define this this type. Okay, so the client.user would be a Prisma.user delegate, Prisma reject on not found, or Prisma.reject per operation. So maybe I can just give it Prisma.user delegate. And the way to do that is we need to import Prisma. No, we don't need that. We just need Prisma. And then this would be a Prisma.user delegate. So it needs types. And that type would be Prisma.reject on not found and Prisma.reject per operation. Or Prisma.reject per operation. So that's the type of this user model, and it's a little bit annoying. That's why we could probably just import the client directly here, but I like passing dependencies sort of to my object. So this user model is now clearly defined as this. So even if I want to use this in a different package, I know that I need to pass this type of model to this thing for it to work. All right. And basically we have a few methods. We're going to have add, and we're going to have login. And what add's going to do is create a new user. First, verify password. We have to hash the password and create user. And this one we have to check credentials and then create a token. So we're going to need a few more packages here. What I'll do is I'll add the to hash a password we can use bcrypt. So I'll add yarn add bcrypt, and we can also add, for creating a token, we've already added JSON web token. So bcrypt we'll use to hash and compare passwords, and JSON web token we'll use to put the user information in a token and set it as a cookie. And then, yeah, I think that's all we need for now. And I'm not sure if I need to install types for bcrypt, but we can see. So basically this will be an async method. And this will also be an async method because there will be database operations. And what I like to start off by doing, so now you can see that Prisma went red again because we installed dependencies, which is kind of annoying. I don't know if there's a way around that, but it's not too big of a deal to sort of run this every time. To refresh all this. Sometimes it takes a while, so what I like doing is just to reload window for it to try and find dependencies and stuff again. And it looks like it's been found. Alright, so what I like doing first is importing Joy from Joy, and this is the validation schema. So I like defining the options for each input. So the options would be users add options, and this would be options for login, which is users login options. And first create those interfaces, and I like to export them because you might use them in a different place in your app as well. So I'll export the interface of users add options, and we know we require an email, and this will be a string. We know we require a password, and this would be a string, and we also require a password confirm, which would be a string. And all three of these are required, so if it's not required we can add like a question mark. But now for each of these interfaces I'd like to define a Joy schema so that it gets validated as I call a method. So what I'm going to do is say const users add options schema equals a joy.object, and this object needs an email, which would be a string, and it needs to be an email, and it is required. And for password, you can do a joy.string.minimum of 7. Let's do 8. So it has to be 8 or longer. And the password confirm would be also a joy.string, but this one has to have a valid property, and we can do joy.ref password. So this is saying that this value of password confirm needs to be exactly the same value as password, otherwise it's invalid and it will throw an error. So required, and then this entire options schema is required. And the way we use this in the method is we can go and say const params equals user add option schema dot validate async, and then we can give it the options. So basically what we're saying is these options that are given to this method, first do this validation on them, and this needs to be awaited. And to give the type inference, we can just say as users add options. So now we have the cleaned up params. So basically at this point, if something goes wrong with this validation, this function will throw an error, or this method will throw an error, and we need to test that and also catch that in some other place. But that means that invalid input was passed, and we need to show that message to the user or something like that. Okay, so now we have the params, and if you look at the params object, you can see that it has email, password, password confirm. Nice type inference. And what we want to do is basically create a user in the database. That's all we want to do. And we don't have to check if password confirm is equal to password because it's already being done in the Joy validation. So all we have to do over here is return this.userModel dot I believe I think we need to, yeah, we can just say, I don't think we might not get type inference over here. I think what we need to do is add this over here for us to be able to get type inference. Yeah, there we go. So what we want to do is do a create, and then we can just give it the data property, and it even gives us what we need to pass. So we know email, we have to pass params.email, and we know password, we have to add a hashed password. So where do we get this hash password? That I'll show you just now. And then the ID we also have to create ourselves, because we didn't make it like an auto ID thing. So this will also be an ID like that. And we don't need to add created, add to dos, add or anything, because that will be automatically done for us. But what we need to do now is create a hash password, and we'll create a, let's do a users, like a static method dot hash password with the actual password, which is on params. And we can also do const id equals UUID. So we need to define all these things. So UUID is pretty simple. We can just import that before as UUID from UUID. And hash password we have to define over here in as a static method. So we can do static hash password, and then this accepts a string. And what this is going to do is use bcrypt. So another dependency we need to import bcrypt from bcrypt. And what we can say over here is this needs to be async, I believe. And we can say return bcrypt dot, and I think we might need types for this, or perhaps we need to do star as bcrypt. Oops. And so now we can do bcrypt dot anything. Well, it's called hash probably, but I think we need to install some types for bcrypt, because I'm not getting any type inference. And then we have to regenerate the Prisma client as well. So yarn add types slash bcrypt. Alright, so now we should get some typing over here. There we go. So I want to do hash, and it takes the data, which would be the password being passed, and it would also take salt rounds, which we will just say is 10. And then we probably also need a confirm password one. Let's do validate or is valid password. And this will take options. I guess we can just do password and hash, which is both strings. And the thing is, we want to pass in the password that the user is trying to enter, and also the hash that we got from the saved users thing. And if they don't compare, then that means it's an invalid user. So basically what we want to do is say return bcrypt.compare, and then we want to give it the password first and then the encrypted thing, which is the hash. So the reason I'm defining these separately is so that I can test them in my tests without having to sort of test bcrypt's implementation. I just want to expect these things to do a certain thing. So that's basically creating a user. And now we need to generate the Prisma client again. Probably reload again. Maybe it found it. Nope. All right, so let's do the login stuff, and then we can write some tests. So check credentials and create a token. This is saying something. So what we need to do over here is say await. Oops, oh, over here. All right, and then user login options we need to define. So let's do that below this. Export interface users login options. This only needs an email and a password. And we can create a joy thing for that again. Users login options schema will also be an object. And basically it's the same as these two. Dot required. And now we can go down here again and we'll say the exact same thing that we did with this to validate those inputs. And we'll use users login options. And the type of this is users login. Okay. So now we know we have email and password. So what we have to do is first we need to get the user by email. The way we do that is we can say the user equals await this dot users model dot find first. We only need the first one, or we can do find unique. And I think, yeah, basically the email property is unique. So I think we can do where email is the params.email. So this user could be a user or undefined. So if no user, then we just want to return undefined. And we'll do error handling based on that. So this will either return a promise of user or undefined. And user we need to import from Prisma because it knows what a user is. And I think for the add options we also returning a user or undefined. Not undefined because the user will always be created, but let's just be explicit and do this. We might need to refactor this because when you register, I don't really want to return the user to the client, but let's for now expect that. And then if there's no user here, we return undefined, but now we have to check that this is a valid password being passed. So first what we can do is we can say that if the user.password is not triple equal to the params.password, that means it's an, and it actually we have to compare this. So if no users dot is valid password, and we have to give it the params.password, which the user passed, and then the user.password, which would be the hashed password. Then we return undefined again. And if it's all valid, then we can create a token. This doesn't return a user. Oh, well, we can create a token in the final step, or we can create the token here. And I think let's do the token creation logic somewhere else. So what I'm going to do is return the user. And then basically we don't need to do anything with JSON web token over here. Or we can still generate the token here, but as a static method, but just do it from outside. So we can do static async create token, and this will receive a user. And basically what we want to do is import JSON web token. JWT. So basically what we want to do is in create token we have a user, and basically we don't want to encrypt the password into the token. We just want the ID and the email, because even if someone is able to decrypt the token, then we don't want them to know what the user's password is. So a token would be a JWT dot sign, and what this will take is the ID and email, and basically we need to give it a secret key. So I'm going to say process.env.jwt token, what did I call that? Secret. And this you'll have to store in whatever platform you're hosting on, the environment variables. But so let's just do something stupid for now. Do secret. And this will return a token, but I believe this returns, is this async or sync? Should I do a wait? No, I think this is a synchronous method, so we don't need to do async over here. And then we can just return this token. But what I want to do actually is set some settings on this. We can do expires in 7 days, because that's how long users should be able to be logged in. And then I'm also, once I return this token, so I'm going to declare like a token type. I'm going to say export the interface of token. Let's do user token. Would be a token which is a string, and a expiry in days which is a number. And the reason I'm doing this is so that we can use the expiry in days on the client to set the cookies time as well, when it should expire. So now I can just return, so this will return up a token, users token, and now I can do token and expires in days 7. And we might as well define this as a global const. Expiry in days equals 7. So that we have this declared globally and we can reuse it. The string needs to be modified now to say token expiry days with the D, and also token expiry days. Cool. What we also want to add is another method called validate token, or basically what we want to do is get the user information from the token. So we could say like verify token, and this will receive a token which is a string, and what this will return probably is a boolean, but I'm not sure about that yet. So let's say I think it will throw an error if it doesn't verify. So we can do return jwt.verify, and basically give it the token and also the same secret. And you should probably make this secret something a lot stronger than secret, but this is just for testing purposes. And this is telling me something. So this will return the actual verified token. So what we can call this is get user info from token. This will return either a ID string, email string, or it will return undefined. And basically what we want to do is just say const verified equals that, and then you can actually just pull this out, and it's going to probably tell me the type doesn't exist, but we'll sort that out, and then just return ID email. Otherwise, if there's an error, return undefined, and we can log this error or something like that. Alright, so you guys might notice that this is now the next day. I've taken a little break. I had to go play some golf before the wind started howling at us. So where we were last is that we've created this verify function, but it's telling me that the types don't exist on that. So what I'm going to do is just sort of hack around this and do string email string, because we sort of know that that would be the type that the token should return, and if it doesn't, then this would throw an error and this would just return undefined. So basically now we have the add function, we have the login function, and what we can do now is actually test this without necessarily having to write out the client code for this. So first we can test this out to make sure everything works as expected, and then if that is the case, then we can write the server side requests and stuff and the client side code for this. And we can add middleware and stuff like that to set the cookie or check the cookie, etc. So what I'm going to do is open up the users.test folder that we created, well, to me yesterday, to you a few minutes ago. And then what I'm going to do is just run a test to see what the coverage currently looks like. So we can do just make sure your database is connected, and then we can do just test. Yeah. So let's see what this gives us. Alright, so now you can see that the users file is not covering these lines. It's only covered 41%. So we can look at this function first, and we'll take it as like a from top to bottom approach. So 48 to 55. Let's open users to the side. So 48 to 55 would be this. So these two static functions. So what we want to test is if we can hash a password and if we can validate a password. So I think this test is pretty useless. We don't really need this. And we'll give this a better description and just say hash password. And then what we want to do is test. I think we can check if it throws an error if we pass nothing. So we can say throws if options are invalid. And this is an async method, so we have to do that. And then we can do await expect that users dot hash password, and then we aren't going to pass anything. We'll get a TypeScript error, but we'll comment that out. Dot rejects to throw, and then we'll just say something, but we'll have to check what it actually throws. So you'll see that this says argument for password was not provided, so TS2554. So we'll comment that out. Add TS ignore TS2554, just so that we know what we are commenting out in this instance. So we can test that. Let's just comment out the client for now. And let's see. It should pass because we expect an error, but we also, so there we go. So data and salt arguments required. So that's the error that we expect. So we can just pass that in. And this is also dependent on the bcrypt library. So you could be a little less explicit and just say to throw without a message, but it's kind of good just to know exactly what is being thrown. And then we can do test encrypts a password, or let's say hashes a password. And we can do async, and then we'll say const hash equals the users dot hash password, and we'll give it a password of password, just so that we don't have to think about that too much. And then what we expect this to look like is a bcrypt hash. So we kind of know that a bcrypt hash has a certain format. So I believe we can do like expect hash dot to, I won't say to be, but we can say to equal. Well, let's do to contain, and then no, not to contain. Let's say hash dot to match. Yeah, that's the one we're looking for. And then the string that we want to match is the $. I think it's 2b or 2y. Let's see, 2y $10, something like that. Might be wrong, but we can fix that. So we can test that. Alright, so it is B. And we'll just copy that first piece, because this will always be the same in the bcrypt hash, because we want to check for this 10 because we are using salt rounds of 10. And the 2b is the type of algorithm that's being used. I think 2y is an older, the older PHP fix of the bug, and you can go check out my bcrypt video if you wanna read more about that or see more about that. So this should cover the entire 49 to 51, because we tested the failure and the success. So you can see that we have now 42 to 47. Oh, and we have to test the constructor. So we'll do that first, just to keep it top down. So we can say describe users constructor. And what we want to do is just say that we're going to say that test throws if options invalid, because it expects a user model, so we need to pass that in there. And this isn't async, so we can do that. So we can say that await, or just I think there's a way to do expect and then a function in here, and then new users dot throws, and TypeScript expects something in there, so we have to comment this up. So it's again 2554. And the reason we're testing these error cases is because that's actually what's going to break the application. And we want to make sure that everything that gets passed in there is actually the correct, the correct data. And if the wrong stuff is passed, it has to throw an error. Okay, so I guess for now we can just do this. And probably we should import the client and the user thing and check if it's the same object. But that gets a little bit too far out. So let's just expect any sort of user model to be defined here, because this is just the interface and it's not a class. So I can't say that it's an instance of this because it's just an object. So I guess that this would not work anymore because we are passing an object. What we might be able to do, okay, I have a better idea. So let's do if these methods don't exist, or some of these methods don't exist on there. So what we can do is say or user model dot create is not a thing. And then this should make the test pass. I mean, you can overwrite this pretty easily just by passing an object with the create function, but at least this is checking something, you know, and all the other things will break anyway if you try and bypass this, but we just want to expect this type of user model. All right, so the next thing to do is 56 to 59, and that is the isValid password. So we can do that in a different describe. So we can do describe, not that, users and isValid password. Oh my goodness. Come on. Cannot type. Alright. So we want to test that it does actually give us the correct hashed pass or the correct compare when passing hash function. So we can do test returns false if password is incorrect. And this will be async. So we can do just say that const result equals the users dot, because this is a static method, we don't need to do new users, dot isValid password, and then it expects a password, and then it actually expects a hash, but we can basically pass in any string over here. And this is obviously incorrect, so we can say expect result dot to be false, not falsy, we just want it to be like straight up false. While that runs, I'll start on the second one. So returns true if password is correct. So now we first need to generate a hash to make sure that so we can say that const hash equals bcrypt, which we'll need to import dot hash. Oh well, I guess we can just do this. Const hash equals, because we've already tested this, users dot hash password, and we're going to give it the password. And we need to await this. And then we can say that const isValid equals await users dot isValid password, and we need to pass in the plain string password and then the hash, and then we have to say expect isValid to be true, and this needs to be an async function. Try that again. Alright, so we're making some progress. Everything passed, but the coverage is still pretty weak. Now we have to move on to the create token function. So we can do describe users create token. And then what we want to test first is that it expects a user to be parsed. So yeah, so we can do throws if no user is parsed. And we should probably explicitly check for this, because it will throw in this instance because it will say ID or email is undefined, but we don't even want to get to that. So we'll tweak that a bit just now, but we can say expect and then a function users dot create token with nothing dot throws, and this is 2554. All right, so that does throw, but we haven't tested the full coverage yet, even though this says 74 to, so it's saying that it did cover all this, but that's why we need to say if user undefined throw new error, the user is required. So this should still pass, but it should give us the correct coverage. So there you see it now detects that we've stopped over there. So the second thing it expects is to create a token, right? Yeah, it needs to sign a token. So let's do test returns a token. We can say const result equals a users.create token, and it expects a user. So what we need to pass in here is a full user from the database. And the way that that is being passed is ID, email, password, created at, updated at. So I think before we actually do create token, because I want to use this add and this add method to create the user. I guess we don't need to, we can just create a user. So what I'm going to do is create a before all, or first let user is a user, and then I'm going to say before all tests. This needs to be async. We can say that user equals await the client.user.create, and what do we want to give it is a data, and that data should be ID. We can just make this a plain string 1 2 3 4, email test@test.com, password, and we don't need to pass those. So this is all we need to pass. And then after all, what we want to do is just delete that user again, just so that our database doesn't fill up with useless test information. And I guess also this is a good point to start scaling or to deploy our main branch, because at the moment this is still a test branch, but we are quite happy with the structure of the schema. So we can promote this to main, and if it's main, then we can create a test branch where we run all our tests. So we don't have to care about accidentally deleting or adding and deleting stuff into our main database. So let me just log in. All right, so what we want to do is go to this database and then promote the branch to production. Yes, successfully promoted. And now we can create a new branch with Prisma. I mean with PlanetScale. Do pscale branch create help. Source database and the source branch probably, or probably the new branch name. Okay, so let's do that. And the source database is Nuxt3 TDD v2. And what we want to create is a test branch. Okay, test was created successfully. So now we can do pscale connect Nuxt3 TDD v2. And we want to connect to the test branch, because we're actually going to start reading and writing stuff to the database now. And this is more like an integration test than a unit test, but unit testing will require like a mock database and mock the responses and stuff. And I think that's a little bit too involved for this specific video. So we're just going to actually test the integration to the database as well. Okay, so it's still creating the branch. It's ready now. All right, so now we're connected to the test branch. So now what we can do is say that after all, we want to await client.user.delete many. We can just do delete, and then we need aware, and then we can say id is user.id. So now we've actually created a user that we can use in all these tests. So what are we testing? The returns a token, which is this one. So what we expect, so we need to do const token equals users dot create token, and then it requires a user, and then expect token to strict equal token expect dot any string, and the expiry in days needs to be 7. And we can probably import this const over here just to make sure it's always up to date, but for now we'll just do this. Let's see if this works. So now you can see before all is running a little while because it's actually creating records. After all, it's deleting the token, and we've passed. Great, so now we do 78, which is get user info from token. So we can do, I'm going to call this tokens so that I don't need to recreate a bunch of tokens. So I'm going to do let token over here, which is going to be token string expiry in days would be 7. Well, I mean just a number. And we can probably be, we did create this. Yeah, so I'm going to import that and use that. Users token. And then basically this, we expect a users token. And then before all, we can just do all the stuff that we did here. And it doesn't have to be const. We're setting the token, and then token equals undefined again. So now we can just say expect token, and then let's do create token dash, and for this one also create token, And then in the next one, which is get user info from token, we want to say that it throws if no token passed, which would be expect the users dot get user info from token with nothing in there to throw. And again, we have to do the TS comment. Let's see if that works. So now the test would run a little slower because we're actually requesting out to a database, but we can actually stub that out if we want to. Alright, so we expected the function to throw an error, but it didn't. And that's because we aren't actually checking, because it's not checking that the token is undefined. So let's do that. Let's try again. Great, so it passes. Now we actually want to see that it returns the correct user. So we can do that from token, and we can say that returns the correct user info. Doesn't have to be correct because we know when there's user info it should be correct. Okay, so we can say that the user info equals users dot get user info from token, and we'll pass in the token that we created. Aha, so this was alright. So because we defined this type, so what I'm just going to do is it's token.token. Yeah. Alright, so we expect user info to strict equal ID. Oh, well, yeah. Okay, so ID would be user.id and email user.email. And we expect nothing else. We don't want the password to be on here. We don't want the created at stuff. The only thing we want is this ID and email. So let's see. Great. So now we got to an interesting part where we want to return undefined if the token is invalid. And the way we're going to do that is by creating a spy for JWT. And this is more like unit testing environment again, so these test files are quite mixed up, but it does show some different strategies. So what we want to do is we want to say that and we'll do this first. Yeah, so we can do test get users info from token, and then we expect returns undefined if an error occurs. So the way we have to do that is we have to mock out this verify function and basically simulate an error. Right? So we can do, and really we don't actually need to do that. We can just pass in a fake token. But I'm going to show you the mocking way just for the sake of it. So we'll create a mock, and this mock will be vi.spyon, and vi we have to import from vitest. So we'll do .spy on the JWT object, and then it needs a method which would be verify, and we're going to say mock implementation, I believe. So this would take a generator function which returns an object, and well, it doesn't need to return an object, it just needs to throw a new error. Right, so now we're saying the mock, whenever this verify function is called on JWT, then we have to change the implementation. So I'm going to say, first of all, expect mock to have been called, and then, but before that we have to say users dot is valid, no, dot get user info from token, and then we'll just pass the token. It doesn't really matter what we pass in here because it's mocked out. And then we expect that mock to have been called, and we expect this value. We expect this result to be undefined, right? And we're going to say mock implementation once. And then in this after all, what we can also do is just say vi.clear all mocks. I'm going to say restore all mocks to its original state. So this way we know it's actually throwing a fake error, or this is being errored. And let's see if we did this correctly. Alright, so something went wrong. Expect ID undefined email to be undefined. So that means it didn't mock this. No, it actually did call the mock. I think we have to do throw new error. Shouldn't return a new error. Right? Because it physically has to error. Returning an error doesn't actually raise the error. Yeah, there we go. So that works, and we know now that this has been mocked because the mock has been called and everything. Great, so 95 we can move on to from here to 137, which is basically the add and the login. So these have quite a lot of things to check, and I'm going to show you the flow of how I do this, but then I'm just going to do it without the sort of boilerplate because it can get annoying. So what I do is I describe the users add, and then in here the tests, I would test this entire params error. So these options, which are users add options, is this email password confirm, and I'm basically testing that Joy is doing what it needs to do. So basically I'll have to say test throws if options are invalid. And this is async. And probably the first 10 or 12 tests would look the same. It will just be an await expect, and then we'll have to say new users client.user, and we'll have to say .add, and for the first one we'll leave it out completely to throw value is required. And these are joy errors that I've already sort of memorized because I do this quite often. And we have to ignore this. And that's what I'll do for every single property of this. So email, we know it's a string, we know it's required. So basically now I'll do the same thing for email. I'll say, now I will add an object, and this will say, and even you can test another one that's here, and you can pass in null instead of an object. So then you say value must be of type object, because that's what joy will throw. And then this one will say email is required. And then if the next thing I'll test is, so now I will pass the email, but I'll give it the wrong type. So I'll say email null, and then it'll tell me that email must be a string. And I'm only going to do this for email and not password confirm and everything, because it's going to get very long and tedious. But in the repo on GitHub, you can see that I actually physically wrote out all the tests. And then, so the next one would be something like email with a empty string. So it's probably going to say email must be a valid email. So let's see if we test that. So you can see that email must be a valid email, but got emailed is not allowed to be empty. Okay, so yeah, that's about it. Let's clear this out. All right, so that passes. And basically you'll do that for all the different cases in the joy schema. So you'll have to just say to throw first and then see what the message is, and then expect that like this minimum 8, if you pass a 4-letter password, it'll tell you that a password must be 8 characters or more or something like that. And you have to physically test all those messages. Just to be sure that when you deploy your code, your validations are still in place. But I'm actually just going to skip over that and just do the physical success cases, which isn't the best way to do it, but I really want to get to just getting to some actual physical code, but also have some tests in place, you know? Okay, so let's do it returns a user, which is an async function. And then what we want to do is say const user equals await new users with the client.user.add, and we'll do email test@test.com, and we'll do password, obviously password and password confirm. Do that. So we can also test the case where if password confirm is not password, then it will throw an error. But that's also done in the joy validations. So I'm just going to rely on joy for now. And then, yeah, it should return a user. So we can say expect user strict equal. And I think let's make this something, because this is going to return the password and everything. So what I'm going to do is there sort of a pick select only, I guess, include, no, because that's just going to fetch the to-dos or something like that. But I was pretty sure there was like a way to Yeah, let's do this. ID, email, not password, created at, and updated at. So what is this saying? So the type would be a bit different. So we'll say that omit user and password. All right, so basically this is built-in TypeScript stuff. You're just saying I want the user but omit the password as a type, and that's basically okay. So now we can say to strict equal ID expect.any string. Email should be test@test.com, and the created at should be expect.any date, and updated at, not that, right? So that's all we expect from the user. And we can add an after all in this describe, because we don't want to fill up the database. We'll say that the await client.user.delete where email is test@test.com. And then we can also check for another case where we can't create accounts with the same email. So we can say test, what will happen? It will throw an error, throw if duplicate email. So we know now we've already created this email, so we can just try doing it again. So we'll say expect, we'll have to do await the new users with client.user .add with the options email test@test.com, password, and password confirm. So we'll expect that to throw an error, rejects to throw. Yeah. So let's see. Nice, it threw the error. And we can be more explicit and see if it's the correct error and stuff, but for now we'll assume that it is. Okay, so finally we can do users login, and we'll say, we'll just do one little test, throws if error, because we need to test the params line. Throws if options invalid. But this, again, you would want to test all the different things passed in there. So we can say await expect new users with the client.user login with, let's just do an empty object dot rejects to throw. And we're not even going to care about the message for now. 2 3 4 5. And well, let's first just cover all cases. So it returns undefined if the user doesn't exist. And for that, we'll actually need a user in the database. So we'll do a before all. So let user. Oh wait, not like that. I guess it's just a normal user. So before all, we'll create this user. We'll say user equals await client.user, and we'll say create, not count, and we need to pass data, ID, email. We'll do password, and that's it, right? I believe so. And what we want to do after all is await the client.user.delete where the ID is equal to the user.id. So now we have a user before everything kicks off, and we're deleting it afterwards. So it returns undefined if user does not exist. So we can say that const result equals await new users login. Email would be something else. Let's say invalid or no exist at test.com. And password would be password. And then we can do expect result to be undefined. So that will cover this case, and then now we need to check that it doesn't give you the token or the user if it's actually an invalid user. So we have to do test returns undefined if password is incorrect. So we'll just copy this, and it actually over here we should pass in a hashed password. So we can just do that, and then we'll need to put in the hash. So this would be a correct password. We need to get the actual user, but let's make it password incorrect. And then finally we should receive a user if everything is hunky-dory. And actually we don't want to receive a user, we want to receive a token. So users.createToken with this user. Type users token. Oh, this returns a users token or undefined. All right, so expect result to be undefined. And then finally we receive a token. Returns a token if credentials are correct. And now we can say that the results would be a token dot login. The email is, now we can just say user.email, the user that we created, and password would be password, because it'll be hashed internally. And then we can say expect result to strict equal token and this would be 7. All right, I think that covers that. So let's test this out. And then we can actually start using our code. We don't feel 100% comfortable with all of the tests because we haven't tested some error cases in certain areas, but we can be rest assured that it sort of does what we want it to do. If you want to see the full test suites, go to the repository link below, and then so this one failed, returns undefined if password is incorrect. Expected something to be undefined. So now we've encountered a little bug. So returns undefined if password is incorrect. So this password is incorrect. And that is params.password, user.password. We have to check this out. Aha. The big issue over here is that we need to await this. And that's the reason we unit test, boys and girls, because, or this is more like integration test, because if we didn't catch that, that could have been a bad bug in production, because it's actually returning some sort of value, even though we expect it not to. So this should now pass. All right, so it seemingly has 100% coverage, but we know that that joy validations is basically one line of code, but there's so many different cases that we could have tested. So just keep that in mind. And now we can actually get back to some Nuxt code, because now we've created and tested our user entity. We have everything we need to do authentication. So I'm going to start with the server. So in Nuxt3, if you create a server folder and you create an API folder, so I'm going to say API/users.post.ts, and what this is going to do, it's going to automatically create a post method endpoint on /API/users, and then all we have to do in here is do export default define, I think it's called a handler, define handler, define something handler, oh, it's called define event handler. And it's strange that it doesn't pick that up. Alright, while that breaks, I'm just going to do import users from that, and we'll do const users equals new users, and this requires a Prisma schema, so we'll do import the Prisma client from that, and then we'll do const client equals new Prisma client, and in here we'll pass in the client dot user, and then in this handler, I know that it takes an event, and we have a useBody method, so we can say const body equals useBody with event, and also it figure it out. Okay, so const body, so we can do when this is a, because the endpoint that we're defining now is a users.post, which basically creates a user. So this will require an email, password, and password confirm. And we don't have to test these because we know our entities has tested it. And if something goes wrong here, we will return an error to the client. So we'll do a try catch just now. And the other thing that we'll do is make this async. And now we can say that the user so we could actually do a create and a login over here so that when you register it automatically logs you in, but I think we'll just do a create and then give the user back to the client and then redirect them to the login page. I think that's the best for now. So let's just do const user equals await users dot add email password confirm, and then we'll do return user. So I'm going to create a little helper function as well, because I despise try catches sometimes. Try wrap, I'm going to call this. Equals an async function which has a promise callback. So I'm going to do try catch, and then we'll try awaiting this promise callback, and we'll then we'll return the result of that. And now we can do return result, and the error would be null. And now if there's an error, we can do return result null, and the error is that. So it's just a way to sort of wrap stuff. Import try wrap from that. And then we can say in this const result and error is equal to await try wrap and the callback. So now we can just return result and error. I'll just return the error message. And this needs to be a promise. All right. So now we need to figure out why define event handler is not working. All right, so I took a little break, but we are back in the event handler for creating users. And the issue, I've discovered a few issues. The one thing was that the types for, so we used to have the, I just fixed this off screen, so let me just explain what I did. We used to have the @Nuxt3 TailwindCSS dependency, but I replaced that with the plain TailwindCSS, and I also installed PostCSS and auto prefixer, and I also configured the Tailwind config like this to include only the pages that we wanted on. And I also did the install of this Nuxt dependency in this way. So with that change, then that fixes the define event handler issue with Nuxt.js. I'm not sure why that is. The Tailwind thing was more so to do with the upgrade of Nuxt, and it seemed like the old Nuxt.js plugin didn't work so well. So also added a Tailwind file in assets with these 3 definitions. And then in the Nuxt config, I'm importing that TailwindCSS directly. So with this Tailwind config, the just-in-time compiler will remove everything that we don't use. So this should make Tailwind work again. And we're getting some errors now on this email password confirmed on the body, because this doesn't exist on promise any. So we have to await use body. And this will be what we pass to the endpoint. So that should allow us to use this endpoint on /API/users/create, and it has to be a post method. And we're getting this error from tsconfig because we have to build our Nuxt app again for it to generate types. And while that builds, I think we also need to redo our Prisma export, because we installed some dependencies, and I believe it looks like the client is still there, so it might still be okay. So now you can see there's a few warnings, but that's okay. We can ignore those for now. So let's try running this just to see that the app actually still runs. Yeah, so we can still see our app. And what we want to do now is we want to be able to create an account. So that we will do in our pages and auth, and we have the authorize. So we have login mode, and we have all these details that are being modeled by the inputs. And what we want to do when we click the authorize button, we want to authorize the user depending on whether it's login mode or not login mode. It will be either register. So what we'll do is we'll first check that it's login mode. So we can do well, we already have that value, so we need to send this request. So we'll do const URL equals the /API/users/create, and this is depending on whether it's login mode or not. So I'm going to create 2 functions, separate functions. I'm going to say const login equals a function, and const register equals its own function. And we'll just call authorize, but we'll call either one of these 2. So what we can do is just say return if login mode dot value. That means we are logging in, then we want to do login, and otherwise we want to do register. And we probably can do this in the template, so let's just remove authorize, and in this one we'll do login mode, we'll do login, else we'll do register. So we don't have login yet, so that'll just be an empty method, but in register we can set the URL to /API/users/create, and the shape of this URL is dependent on the structure of the folders in server. So anything inside API will get the API routes, and then users, and then whatever is in front of this name. If it's create.get.ts, that means it's a get request to create. If it's post, put, delete, etc., that would be the name of the URL. So just as a recap, in here we are calling the source that we've written, the entities code, with users.add. Alright, so let's see what that returns. So let's go to URL. And then what we can do is use the built-in fetch method. So we can say const pending, well, we can just do const data error equals await we can just call fetch like this. I believe we don't need to give it this needs to be an async. And we will fetch the URL. Oops. We'll fetch the URL with the data of the user. So in here we'll pass in the data. So that would be body. First of all, we need to do method post, and body has to be the expected item. So email, password, password confirm. So we can just do email.value, password, password.value, and password confirm. This needs to be result. Okay, so that means we're sending the post request, and what we want to check is if there's an error. And I believe this will, yeah, if there's an error, we can set error.value equals to the error. So we have conflicting names now. So what I'll say here is just do failure. The error.value should be true. And I believe we show, okay, so this will have to be a string because we're checking if the error exists. So it's either null or string. So we can probably define that as like ref of null or string. And then we have to import ref. I believe it's from app, or is it from Nuxt? View? Yeah, I think we import that directly from view. So this is just to sort of show the types. So Boolean is not assignable to string, so we have to give an error message. And what we can do is say something went wrong. Please try again. And return. And if result.error, we also want to say error.value equals result.error, because result.error would be a string, because that's what we'll pass from here. Okay, so no, we are passing the error, so we don't have to do this check. What we can do is say error.value equals failure, because failure will be a string. Alright, and then if there's a result, that result would be a user. So what we can do is say console.log the result, just to see what we get back after we sort of log in. And what we want to do is say, let's do some fake data just like that. Authorize, this needs to be test. And it's sending now. It's actually not sending anything. Maybe we need to refresh this. Still nothing. And I believe that might be to do with this. Okay, so we sent to, so now you can see password is not allowed to be empty, and that's coming from the joy validations. So if we do password length must be at least 8 characters length. So let's do password authorized. Oops, and we've shut down our database. So that's not actually a message we would want to send to the client. So just probably don't just feed your errors straight down from the backend. Probably need to do some other checks and send custom messages for the client to show. But for now, we'll just do this. What we want to do is just start our database again. I called this what was this called? V2 test. All right, so it seems like we are connected now. And if we go back to our app, we should try this again. Pending, got a 500, and the response is internal server error. Cannot read properties of null, reading message. That would be in this, where we do error.message. Right, obviously we don't want to do it like this. We want to say that if there's an error, we want to return result of null and error of error.message, and else we want to return the result and the error should be null. So let's just refresh this. We can do test@test.com, and the password, just 4 characters will break. Password and I can see unique constraint failed. So that means that it's actually sending this to the database because it's actually getting to the create, which means that something is going wrong in the validations. And if our tests were a little bit better, then we wouldn't have faced this issue, because unique constraint means that we've actually already created this user, and that shouldn't have even occurred because we haven't entered a password. So let's go check out our user source. And if we go to add, it should have thrown us an error because this was not correct. Strange. Okay, so let's have a look. Obviously. So this was actually a client-side bug, which is horrible because I passed the same value for password confirm as password.value. So obviously they are the same. So we have to do this, which means so that could be a detrimental error if you don't test your client-side code as well. So let's try something else, test2@test.com, and then password. And there you can see password confirm must be ref password. And obviously we don't want these ugly messages, but I'm not gonna format a bunch of error messages now, but hopefully you can figure out how to do that by yourself. Okay, so if I add password now and do this again, it's a 200 and we actually get the user back. So that should have logged the user, which is great. And it didn't give us the password, just the ID, created it and updated it. So now we actually get the user when we log in. But what we actually want to do is, what we actually want to do is in the auth page, once this has happened, we can just say, I think there's a way to say, how do we redirect? We can get the router, but I'm pretty sure there's a better way to do that. But let's just do const router equals use router. And this is also a global, so you don't need to import that. And then over here we can just say router.push/auth/login. For now we'll just do that, but most likely you probably want to authenticate the user already and then just let them pass through, but we'll just push them to the login page without any notification that they've successfully been created. Or we could say like login ? Success. Oops. And then in the we don't have a login route, so I guess we can just do this because we're using state, so we can just say that instead of going to a new route, we can just say that the login mode is equal to true, and we need to use the dot value. And then we can just reset these values, and email.value equals that, and password confirm dot value equals that. You might want to create a reset function, but we'll just do it inline. And currently we aren't really using the result, so we don't need to do that. Great, so now let's work on some login stuff so that we can actually authenticate the user. So basically we already have our login route logic set up in the entities, so that'll be this. And what we want to do is get this from the API users. We'll create a new file. We'll say that login.post.ts, and then we'll export default a defined event handler, and that'll take an async event, and we want to import that users again. And at this point you can see that this might get a little bit tedious to do this, importing this every single time and importing the Prisma client every time, and then instantiating the Prisma client, so that when we use it we can say const users equals new users with the client.users. So that we'll have to repeat that for every single time we use this. So what we can do is just create like a database folder or like a models folder or something. So we can do models, and then we can say that everything that we create, so now we only have users, but as we build more things like to-dos and everything, then we don't have to keep repeating ourselves here, because we can just instantiate everything. So we can do import Prisma client, and then const client equals the new Prisma client, and then we can say export const users equals client.user, and then we'll do that basically for everything. We don't actually need users here, we can just export that separately so that we don't have to keep importing this. We can just import the users. Let's call this user model, since we already sort of stuck to that convention. So login.post, now we don't need to do this. We can just do import user model from source models, and we only instantiate one Prisma client this way as well, so we don't keep creating new Prisma clients. And then in this we can just add the user model, and we can do the same in create. So Prisma client can go, and we can just import the user model from that, and then instead of this we can just do user model. Right, so over here what I'll do is in the body we receive an email and a password, and this will be equal to await use body with the event passed in. And then we want to do try catch again. So what we want to do is get a token and then set that token in the response. So there's a neat way to do that. What we'll have to do is first of all get the token. So const, we'll do call it credentials equals await the users dot login with the options of email and password. And if this fails, then we'll just return the result of null and error of error.message. If it doesn't fail, then we'll return. It doesn't really matter what we return, because the important thing is to set a cookie in the response. Alright, so I think this shouldn't be use cookie, this should be set cookie. And then this expects the event, and then the name of the cookie we'll call Nuxt3 to do token v2, and then the value. So that value we need to get the token. So basically what we're going to set here is the credentials.token, and we also want to set an expiry on this. So expires, and that's why we added that expires in days field. So what I'm going to do is create a new date, and then I'm going to say date.now plus the credentials.expiry in days, and then to get from days to milliseconds. So a day is 24 hours, so times times 24 we'll get hours, then times 60 we'll get minutes, times 60 we'll get seconds, and then times 1000 we'll get milliseconds. So that should give us the correct expiry date, which is going to be 7 days in our case. And then basically we can just return data, actually anything over here, because so we can just say success and error of null, because the way we're going to use this set cookie, it's already going to be set in the response. So if this is a successful query, then we can just redirect and the cookie will be available in the app. So we can test this out now. So let's go to the login route, and then we can say const URL equals the API users and login, and we want to say const error. We don't need the response with this either, so we can do await fetch, which is built in, and then URL method post, and the body would be email, which is email.value, and password which will be password.value. So we aren't sending a confirm password because this is the login route, so we don't need to send that. So now what we can do, and we have to rename this again because we're already using error up here, so that will be a naming conflict. But so now we can say if failure, we can say this, I mean that's old view stuff, so error.value equals failure, and then just return. And otherwise we have a cookie. The cookie should be set. So what we'll do here is just redirect. So we'll say location dot replace slash, and this should work already if everything went well. So let's refresh this. So we've created this account test2@test.com with password, and if we authorize, then we should be redirected. And there we go. So if we look at the application, we have this Nuxt3 to do cookie set, which is great. So now it's checking that cookie, but now we also need to have a way to check on the server side whether this cookie is available, because there will be routes like to-dos and stuff that shouldn't even be handled when there is no cookie like this. And the way we'll do that is by adding a global middleware. And the way you do that is by going to server and then create a new folder called middleware. And middleware will fire globally, so you can do auth.ts. And then you'll just export the same thing. Export default, define event handler with an async event. And this event has a few properties if you're wondering. So it has the context, the event, request and response, like in the old Express days, you know. But most of the time you'll just use these helpers and pass the event, and they will automatically check those for you. But in this case, we'll manipulate the context. So what we have to do over here is we have to say that we have to get the cookie from the request, which would be const cookies equals use cookie. And what we want to look for is the Nuxt3 to do token v2. And we just have to make sure that we name this the same everywhere, because I think, yeah, so that looks fine. And in your auth cookie, now you'll get a cookies response. And Nuxt3 has a sort of rule with middlewares. In Express, when something is invalid, you will, let me just turn on a light quickly. I just realized you guys can't see me. All right, hopefully that's better. I've just switched on a light. But in the old ways, or you know, like the Express way or whatever of doing middleware, what you'll usually do is you'll redirect if something isn't there. So you'll say like, if there's no cookie, then redirect to something else. But in this case, we don't want to do that. We just, Nuxt sort of recommends that you only manipulate the context in this instance. So what you basically do is, if there's no cookie, then you just return. So it will still go through to the next route. We need to do, and we actually need to say this. And I believe this needs to be use cookie. We have to import it different because now it's going to sort of override. Yeah, so we need to use cookies instead of a cookie. Or I actually believe that, let's see what this does. Let's see if this works. Just use cookie and get that value. If there's no cookie, then return. Otherwise, we want to get the verified user. So now we have the user's static method that we can actually get the user from this cookie, because we created that. So we can say import users from source users, and then we can say await users dot get user info from token, and the token would be the cookie. And now that we have the verified, so if there's no verified user, so if verified user equals undefined, then we have to just return out of this. Otherwise we can say event.context.user is equal to verified user. So they don't recommend you doing an early redirect here. So this has to be cookie.value, I believe. And I think because we're on the server side, let's use the use cookie from H3, which is the internal server of that Nuxt uses here. So now it's overriding the normal one, so we can do event and the one that we want, which is Nuxt3 to do token v1. And now there's no value. We can just pass in the cookie directly. So now there's a user on the context. And what we need to do is in all the routes that a user is required, we need to check that that user is basically there before doing anything. So when we create like a to-dos endpoint or something like that, if that user isn't there, then we need to redirect instead of having a global redirect here, if that makes sense. So basically, let's say like this, the create route was protected. What we'll do is we'll say if the event.context.user is equal to undefined, then we'll do a early redirect. So then we'll do something like return send redirect with the event, and the location would be auth. So that's how we'll protect API routes. But both of these routes are still open, so that doesn't really matter for now, but that's the way we'll do it. Probably in the next video, because this one's getting quite long, when we start working with to-dos. So we've created the middleware now, and we can create users, we can log in with users, and basically we just want to add like a logout page, a logout link. So in index, what we can do over here is add a nav section and just make this flex, and I'll say justify end. I think, yeah, justify end would be good. And then we just create a link that says nothing, we'll just do log out, and at click will log out. And this is a method that we'll write. And we'll clear the cookies and then redirect the user. So the way we can clear the cookies, let me just see. I think I'm going to use a small little package for this that just makes it a little bit easier. It's called JS cookie. So I'm just going to do yarn add JS cookie. And then in the the index page, we'll import cookie from JS cookie. And then all we'll do here is cookie.remove, and this will be Nuxt3 to do token v2, and then location.replace with auth. So we've added a logout link as well. So in models we get, because we installed a new dependency, we have to do npx Prisma generate. That should fix that. If we do a reload, and our app should still be running, but it isn't, so let's just rerun it. And see where we are at visually, because we've done a lot of things now. We have adding a user, so we have a logout button here. If we click that, it takes us away. If we check the cookies, we shouldn't have our cookie anymore. So if we try to go back to slash, it won't take us there because we have that route middleware. If we try to sign back in again, test2@test.com, password, and we could probably put a loading state on this button, but for now we can still add to-dos, but this would still be just on your local. So if you refresh this page, all your to-dos will be gone. And I think that will be the focus of this video, is just adding authentication, because this video is probably really long by now. And then in part 3, we'll add the physical to-do logic, do the testing of the to-dos on the database side, and then also get the to-dos of a certain user based on the cookie in the and the context that we set. So if event.context.user has a value, then we can use that value to fetch the to-dos of a certain user, which makes it very easy. And then we can also update, delete, and add to-dos, and then that'll be the whole thing. So this project is live, the final version, where you can go check it out. In Nuxt3 todo.visal.app, it has, let me just log into my account. I've stupidly used the actual email of myself, so I don't want to expose that. Alright, so I just logged in, and now you can see that if I create to-dos and I refresh, those to-dos are actually still there. I can complete them, refresh, they should still be completed because this wrote to the database, and delete them, refresh, they should still be gone, and I can log out. And this is basically the same logic that we already have. So you can go play around with that or use the app if you want to, but in the next episode we'll tackle to-dos and how to make them work. So hopefully this was useful. This is a really massively over-engineered to-do application. There's many easier ways to do this, but this is just sort of me exploring everything that's available in Nuxt3, or most of the things, and sort of trying to look at how scaling would work and how to define routes and middlewares and things like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, leave a comment below, like, subscribe, do all those things, and I'll see you next time.